Okay, good evening. I was just about to tell you, I give you my word, I won't yell at you tonight. but, but I can't make that promise because sometimes things just happen. But today, this evening, we will get our start in the book of Matthew, Matthew chapter 11. Matthew chapter 11, the first of what we often call the Synoptic Gospels. And this whole chapter is just jam-packed with phenomenal spiritual information. Jesus I don't know, honestly, this is like still somewhat early on in his ministry. But he's had the disciples of John approach him, and they, on John's behalf, asked Jesus if he is who he says he is, if he was the one that was to come. And Jesus has a excellent answer. Basically, kind of like the proof is in the pudding. We'll take a look at what's been happening. It's pretty obvious. And then Jesus has an opportunity to turn the attention to like the people who he's preaching to, because he's spent a lot of time in the northern country, which is his hometown, Galilee, and there's Nazareth, and there's Capernaum, and some of those places up in the northern territory, and especially down in the southern country as well, when you have the higher class Jews, for lack of a better way of putting it, the big city Jews. And everyone, for the most part, is rejecting him. Of course, everybody wants to be healed and everybody wants to be fed. But outside of that, most people are just kind of treating him like he's a spectacle, right? And Jesus turns his attention to these people. And if you take a look at verse 21, he refers to some well known sinful places as he rebukes the places that should know better. So he says in verse 21, "Woe unto you, Chorazin! Woe unto you, Bethsaida, which are Jewish towns, for if the mighty works which were done in you had been done in Tyre or Sidon, they would have repented long ago in sackcloth and ashes." No, Tyre and Sidon are historically known for being wicked places. And he says in verse 22, "But I say unto you, it shall be more tolerable for Tyre and Sidon at the day of judgment than for you." That's a pretty big blow. You know what I mean? That's a pretty bold statement that Jesus makes against truly his own people when it comes to his bloodline, the Jews or the Hebrews. Verse 23, he says, "And you, Capernaum, which are exalted unto heaven, shall be brought down to hell." Sweet mercy. That's some pretty strong words, huh? "For if the mighty works which have been done in thee had been done in Sodom," oh, this is rough stuff. I mean, you compare us to Sodom? That's rough. "But if these things had been done in Sodom, it would have remained until this day." So this brings about a lot of questions. You could ask a lot of philosophical, theological questions based off of what Jesus is saying right here, but we're just going to take him at face value with what he says here. Because really, honestly, it's like kind of not fair that Sodom didn't get this kind of attention. So if this is true, why didn't it work out? But God knows. God knows those kinds of questions and those answers. Verse 24. "But I say unto you that it shall be more tolerable for the land of Sodom in the day of judgment than for thee. Okay. And this, of course, infers an upcoming final judgment. Sodom has already been judged to be wiped from the face of the planet. However, their souls are in a certain waiting zone, waiting for the final day of judgment. But verse 25 is actually the main thing that I wanted to bring to your attention. Jesus has already made some very strong, very bold remarks. I can tell you right now that it's exactly this style of preaching and this style of teaching that is very unpopular. And it's inevitably what brought him to the cross because he told the truth. He didn't beat around the bush. He didn't apologize for telling the truth. And he had a way of doing it that really cut deep. And verse 25 to me is something that simultaneously impresses me, intrigues me, and terrifies me. So let's read verse 25 together. Matthew chapter 11, verse 25, it says, At that time Jesus answered and said, I thank thee, O Father, Lord of heaven and earth, because you have hid these things from the wise and the prudent, and has revealed them unto babes. So, for Jesus to actually, in a moment such as this, take the opportunity to bow his head publicly, as it seems to be so. And not only so, but I also made this observation in my studies that the author of this gospel, Matthew, found it appropriate to not just move right on into verse 25. Did you notice that? Many of us use the red letter edition of the Bible. You can see in verse 25, the first few words are in black, which means that they are the narrative, not the words of the Christ proceeding from his actual mouth, right? And to me, that's definitely a literary technique to get you to stop and think for a moment, because Jesus has been talking this whole time, rebuking and speaking the truth in a very harsh, bold, but also gracious way, because his whole intent is to save. And then Matthew stops right there and says, I just want the audience to know that at that time, Jesus answered and said. So there's a pause right there, and it's almost like it gives you a chance to kind of take a deep breath, because this is for you. This is for me. So take a deep breath and notice what he is saying. First off, he's talking to the Father in the form of prayer. And Jesus the Christ thanks him for something. Now, I'll tell you what right now. And you could probably identify with me on this. I don't think I've ever said thank you to God like this. Like, God, I thank you that people are lost. That's kind of how it seems. Isn't that peculiar? Doesn't that kind of make you stop and think? Now, he's not saying thank you that people are lost. That's not what he's saying at all. Usually when I say thank you for dinner, thank you for family, thank you for Jesus, thank you for those kinds of things. Thank you for uh, plenty of gas in the tank if I need to get somewhere. I've lived in times when that was hard to come by, so I definitely am thankful. I love it when I get in the car and I turn it on and the gas tank is full. I'm like, oh man, that's so nice. But I say thank you for that kind of stuff. So for Jesus to publicly do this, means we should probably pay close attention. And let's see what he says thank you to the Father for. He says, thank thee, O Father, Lord of heaven and earth, because you have hid these things from the wise and the prudent, and has revealed them unto babes. For those who would not recognize the Christ because they were just too smart and they were just too obsessed with being correct or being right. They're too obsessed with their own ego. Because of that, the gospel is something that they just simply cannot see. But those who are humble, those who are childlike, those who are willing to swallow that pride are able to see what the gospel is all about and how to respond to it. It's almost like in this moment, there's a human emotion that Jesus is transferring in the form of prayer to the Father, because notice what he says in the following verse, verse 26. Even so, Father, for so it seemed good in your sight. Now, the why I mentioned it seems almost as if Jesus is grappling over human emotion is because he's having to lean on the Father and his divinity. He's having to lean on the higher principle because Jesus wasn't a hateful person. He didn't look at people and think, well, man, I can't wait to see you burn in hell. He didn't say that kind of stuff. He didn't think that kind of stuff. That was James and John, if you recall. Or James and John, when the Samaritans rejected Jesus. You guys remember what they said? Hey, Jesus, should we have, God send a fire from heaven and consume these dirty, rotten Samaritans? You remember that? Remember what their nickname was? Sons of Thunder was what their name was. Boanerges, or something like that. I don't know if I pronounced it right, but Boanerges, which means sons of thunder. So they had a little bit of fire in the belly, the James and John. And Jesus looks to them and says, "No, no, no. That's not why we're here." So he didn't have that attitude. He didn't have that perspective. But he still was able to acknowledge when the Father was the one who chose who would be saved. When the Father chose a message that would only be a message that could be heard by people of a humble heart. So this is good news and bad news, is it not? It's good news because, first off, Jesus knows exactly who ought to be saved. He knows exactly who ought to be receptive to it. The Father knows, and it was good in the sight of the Father, as he says in verse 26. The bad news is pride is really hard to overcome. And thinking that we are wise and we are prudent is very difficult to overcome. I really do believe that you can make a very strong case in the scriptures that pride has the capacity to shut you off from the true nature and the true meaning of the gospel and the word of God, even if you think you know. Even if you pick it up and read it, there's so many people. These Pharisees knew their Torah better than we know our New Testaments, would be my guess. Like they knew their their law of Moses. They knew the book of Isaiah. They knew it well. And they still missed it. Jesus accepts, not only accepts, that's not even a strong enough word. He's thankful to the Father for making that decision. And in a certain sense, I have to say that I'm also thankful too, because I can't be the one to judge. I can't do it. And I'm so happy that the word has been provided and the Spirit is able to help us and guide us when it comes to that. But if you haven't guessed yet, this is a lesson on pride, and this is applicable to all flesh. This is not applicable to all those scoundrels out there who should be here right now. It's like all those scoundrels. They need to be. If they're not here, therefore they're the end. No, 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 no. We must all understand our susceptibility to what Jesus is saying right here. I'm going to use this as an opportunity to take you on over to a verse in the book of Proverbs to pave the way just a little bit more. We're going to do a brief exposition of a text in the first epistle to the Corinthians in just a moment, but I want to just show you this statement in the book of Proverbs, chapter 18 and verse 12. And it is a verse that is pretty well known. It's a verse that you're going to hear from time to time. It's even used in secular circles. Proverbs 18 and verse 12. And the book of Proverbs covers the subject of pride uh, very well. So, Proverbs 18, verse 12. Let's read this verse together. Before destruction, the heart of man is haughty, and before honor is humility. And there's another way that it can be put if you go back on to chapter 16 and verse 18. It says, pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. So, the fall comes, but not usually before pride. Pride is something that precedes the fall. The haughty spirit comes before destruction. When somebody reaches a point where they say, behold, look what I have done. Somebody thinks, man, I'm good. Or behold, my power and my strength and the might of my hand has gotten me these things, has gotten me this wealth. This is stuff that's not easy to catch right in the moment. You know, Americans, and not I'm only talking about Americans because I am an American. I've never really been anywhere else. But Americans are proud people. We're pioneers. We're survivors. Uh, there's a heritage in America of leaving somewhere and like a pilgrimage and surviving, of being brought over here as a result of however it took place. And there's many different styles and ways in which it happens, but there is a surviving spirit and a pioneering spirit in America. And as a result of that, it has become the wealthiest nation that the world has ever seen. Right? I mean, there's so much money in this country; it's insane. There are so much money coming out of this country to support other countries just as a result of charities and things like that because we have so much, and that's a good thing. But one of the things that comes with that is pride. One of the things that comes with that is look at this retirement that I have built. Look at this fortune that I have developed. Look at these things that I have been able to create, this empire. And whenever we let that seep into the heart so much that it takes a hold and takes root, and like seeds, they get planted in the heart, it can actually really, start to dig deep inside of the heart and get us to think that we are more than we really are. And what it does is it can put us into a position of having a proud look. Now, the proud look can happen even if you're wrong or even if you're right. Either way, it's no good. That's one of the trickiest parts about it. Go back to chapter 6 of the same book of Proverbs for a moment here. Take a look at this. When you consider the book of Proverbs, chapter 6 and verse 16, there's a commonly noted list of things here. 6 things that God hates, yea, 7 which are an abomination unto him. Now, here's what we're going to do. We're going to read the 16th verse. And then we're going to move on to the list. Okay? Chapter 6 and verse 16, it says, "These 6 things does the Lord hate. Yea, 7 are an abomination unto him." Okay, so like I said, we're going to read that verse, stop, and just think about that with me for a moment. First off, God is love. I mean, that's First John right there, man. That is the uh, the wondrousness of God. God is love. He's patient. He is kind, gracious. So when he hates something, you know it's serious. See what I'm saying? When he hates something, you know it's for real. So stop and think about that for a moment. That God hates some of this stuff. Now let's move on to the list. Verse 17. A proud look. Okay, that's all I needed to do was take a look at the first one on the list. Number 1 on the list. A proud look. It didn't say whether the person was right or whether the person was wrong. I can tell you right now, I learned this from marriage. You can be right and brother oh so wrong. Because it's not what you said, it's how you said it. And I'm telling you right now, I have suffered for having a proud look. um, Pray for me, as I usually request after I make such statements. It's a good thing we love each other. And Laura is very strong to deal with the pain and agony of having a preacher as a husband. But anyway, but this is marriage 101 in all actuality, you know. Um, I've been 100% right. I'm telling you right now, 100% right. And boy, I was wrong, you know. So, one of the reasons why it's so important to understand this fact is because it has a way of sneaking on in there. Pride. And it has a way of contaminating. And it's like this. Okay, so you were right. But then don't forget that pride is what happens before you fall. There's another statement that I'm going to uh, quote for you. You know what? Let's go turn on over there. 1 Corinthians chapter 10. 1 Corinthians chapter 10. So, yes, we are in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, and we are going to backtrack a little bit from here and then finally make it to the the main text. Yes, I have not made it to our main text yet for this evening. I'm still just paving the way, showing you how important this is. And there's a very a real reason why I am emphasizing this so strongly. Uh, it's because I am guilty, is the reason why. I am guilty, and I have been proud so many times. There's another proverb, and this one is just another one of the ones to add to the list. It says, "Let another man praise you, and not your own lips; a stranger, and not your own." You know? So we must understand how susceptible we are to this disease of pride, and understand that it truly is the enemy of good relationships. Most especially, it is the enemy of our relationship with the God of heaven. I mean, you can use the same logic to say, well, to behave proudly against our fellow man is one thing, but how can you say that you are not a proud person against God if you're proud against your fellow man? It's all, I'm using the same reasoning that John used when he says, "How can you say you love God and hate your brother?" You can't do that. That doesn't make sense. It doesn't work. You can't, behave proudly against your neighbor, your brother, your friend, and then turn around and pretend like you can be humble with God. You know, it's something that just doesn't work. Those two ideas clash. Now, 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 12, it says, "Wherefore let him that thinks he stand take heed lest he fall." Now, Paul was talking to the Corinthians here, and he uses the Old Testament as an example within the context. And what he is doing is he is making the case that these were God's people, and even though they were delivered from bondage of Egypt, while they were out in the wilderness, still found a way to fall. And so Paul then follows up some of those comments with this statement. Let him that thinks he stand take heed lest he fall. So it's like, okay, so you're standing. That's all fine and good, but make sure you don't fall. You see what I'm saying? And that's the reason why it's so important to understand that you can be right and still oh so wrong. This is important in the realm of evangelism as well. Because people don't like to change. People don't like to hear what God really says. And so people like to argue. Religion is one of the most argued subjects. It probably is the most argued subject. Maybe right now, because of the political issues we have, maybe politics is a little bit higher than religion right now. But let's face the facts. Religion is a big part of why there is so much division. If everyone would just listen to God, like everything would be pretty cool. But that's not the world we live in. And one of the hardest things to do when you truly believe yourself to be right is to proclaim it in a loving, patient, gentle way, especially if the other person is a raging fool. Very difficult. The Christ was the greatest example of this. Wonderful example. He's the only one who actually had the right to look at everyone and say, I am 100% right. You are all wrong. He's the only one who had the right to do that, and not even he would do that. He never just said, "You guys are all buffoons," He didn't do that. He came down from heaven and walked among us and just dealt with our ridiculous arguments and our ridiculous emotions and our ridiculous pride and explain, okay, I'll explain it to you again. Wonderful example. In fact, in all actuality, he could have just stayed in heaven and said, I'm not going down there. I'm not going to help you. That would be pride. He's not a proud God. He really isn't. I actually wrote a series of sermons on the subject of the qualities of God. And what I did was I looked up, and it's kind of hard to do, in some of these qualities because I pinpointed and kind of enumerated a bunch of qualities that are found in the scriptures, like love, joy, peace, long suffering, goodness, meekness, faith, temperance, the fruit of the spirit and things like that. And I looked for places in the Old Testament where, like, God, Jehovah from heaven, it's really easy to see when Jesus behaved in certain ways because he was a man on earth, but to see God do it from heaven is kind of difficult to find sometimes. And there's an actual statement in the book of Job. I'm not going to take it there right now, but I'll just throw it out there for you. I believe it's chapter 40 of the book of Job, where God says to Job, if you can go ahead and speak and you can do all these great things, then I would confess to you. He actually makes that statement to Job. He says, "No, if go ahead. If you can tell me, if you can teach me something, I would confess to you." That's amazing. I love that. I love that statement because God says, "Okay, I'll humble myself before you." Of course, Job can't do that, but God says, "I would." That's amazing for a God that amazing, that complex, that powerful to say to a man, "Okay, I confess to you." That's huge. That shows you how humble our God is. And here we are thinking we know something. Like it's hilarious. It's laughable. You know. Go with me now back to chapter 3 of this First Corinthian epistle. First Corinthians chapter 3, verse 18. Paul says in these first four chapters, really these first four chapters of the First Corinthian epistle are a masterpiece in Paul paving the way to rebuke the Corinthians. He goes into amazing uh, principles and ideas and expression on the subject of humility, truly, is what the point really is. But I want to pinpoint the 18th verse of the third chapter with you. So 1 Corinthians chapter 3 and verse 18, Paul makes this statement. Let no man deceive himself. If any man among you seems to be wise in this world, let him become a fool, that he may be wise. For the wisdom of this world, I'm reading verse 19 as well. For the wisdom of this world is foolishness with God. For it is written, he takes the wise in their own craftiness. Okay. Now, verse 18 in the very beginning is one of those very difficult statements because it's of the utmost importance to realize that this is no easy task, because if you are deceived, then how can you recognize that you are deceived? Pretty interesting when you really think about it. I remember taking a philosophy course it's kind of like a psychoanalysis philosophy course years ago. And they're talking about some of Freud's theories. You know how people suppress and oppress memories. And this is a real thing. This isn't just theory. People will actually oppress memories. And I can't remember which one was the more intense of the two. I think suppression was when you just kind of forget something, but to oppress a memory is when you actually like erase every sign of the memory, like all evidence that there ever even was a memory. And it's actually a tactic, and probably one that God gave us to spare us from pain, because some people go through intense trauma. Intense trauma. Some people just get mad and angry or emotional or sad, and they have no idea why. And it actually was triggered or prompted as a result of something that reminded of them of this memory that was oppressed or suppressed in some way. But one of the problems with being human, something that we do that when it's not to our service, is when we erase every sign that we are deceived. And that's what pride does. And only the Word of God is sharper than any two-edged sword, able to pierce asunder soul and spirit and joints and marrow, and is a discerner of the thoughts and intents of the heart. No other book or word or idea or message has the capacity to truly cut to the heart of sin and the heart of deception. And so when Paul makes a statement, it's not an easy one. Let no man deceive himself. Well, I already did, and I've erased the fact that I have. It usually takes pain, a lot of times hitting rock bottom before we finally wake up and say, I've been wrong this whole time, and I'm sorry. Much of the time we can't even bear the pain of guilt. It wasn't even easy for me a moment ago to stand up here and say to you, one of the reasons why I'm preaching on this right now and placing so much emphasis on it is because I am guilty. I'm not going to share with you the exact moment, but it was within the past 3 or 4 months that I can tell you the time frame that something happened within my heart and within my mind, and I had an actual feeling of pride, and God cut me down in ways that I cannot describe to you right now. It would just take too much time, and you don't care anyway, right? But I am guilty. The truth is, we all are. You're wrong about something. We're wrong about something. That's why being human is tough, especially when it comes to other people, relationships. Relationships are so important that Jesus the Christ in the Sermon on the Mount actually said, if you bring your gift to the altar and remember that somebody has something against you, a brother has something against you, leave your gift at the altar. Like, don't sacrifice it yet. And you know what a gift at the altar is, right? It's like a goat. So you gotta pay someone to babysit the goat for you. You ever thought about that? I never even thought about that till just now. Some of those things about preaching. Sometimes you just come up, you never thought about that. That's a living thing. Like, it's not easy. It's not like you can like put it in a cubby, and like put the password in, like when you go to the museum and you can't bring water in there. That happened just the other day. It's not like that. It's a living critter. So, hey, would you babysit my goat for me? I have to go say sorry to my brother. Well, where's your brother live? Dude, he lives he lives across town, man. It's gonna be like 3 hours. You gotta be kidding me, It's like, well, I'll pay you $20. How about that, I mean, you leave the gift at the altar. Go make amends, then come back. That's how important it is to swallow your pride. It's more important than offering your gift. I mean, I don't know if you could say it's more important, but you have to do it before you can worship God with a clean conscience, because it's not more important, but you can't do one without doing the other, truly. So let's do an exposition of the first chapter. I'm finally making it to our main text. And I've been rambling on about pride for a while now, haven't I? So let's go ahead and take a look at a few verses here. And I'm not going to do nearly as much as I thought I was going to do in this chapter, but I will show you a couple of things. First Corinthians chapter 1. And to give this to you, I think this is the chapter that Jerry said, go home and read the whole chapter. Is this the one that you said like 3 Sundays ago? I think it was this chapter. I think it was. I think it was. Okay, maybe that's why I'm preaching it right now. This is all Jerry's fault. This whole sermon. You guys don't get mad at me. It's Jerry. Yeah, First Corinthians chapter 1. So just to give you a heads up on what's going on, the Corinthians were a mess. They were not doing okay. If the Corinthian church was here today, we wouldn't associate with them. Let's put it that way. We'd be like, oh, that congregation? Yeah, stay away from them. We would not. It would be like, I highly recommend you don't go over there. Come over to Alameda. We're cool over here, but not Corinth, man. And one of the biggest issues was pride and showing off and division. So, verse 18 is actually what I want to spend some time looking at with you for this moment. It says in verse 18, for the preaching of the cross is to them that perish foolishness, but unto us which are saved, it is the power of God. Now, most of you use more contemporary versions, and that's, I'm not going to say either good or bad. It just is what it is. The King James version here, I don't think is the best translation when it comes to the word here. Preaching. So my version says the preaching of the cross. So the word is actually logos or logos, which is the Greek word that where the word logic comes from. But the word simply means word. And it is bigger than that. It's more than that. There's a depth to it. But logos is like an idea, a message, something that has power to it. It's almost like knowledge is power. That's a common statement that you have and that you hear. The more you learn, the more you earn, and things like that. And the word was used in many different capacities. But when you take a look at it in the New Testament, and when it's brought forth like this, says the word of the cross, that is giving it a very special meaning, because the word here is referring to the gospel, the word of God. If you go back to John chapter 1 and verse 1, you will find the statement, in the beginning was the word, and the word was with God, and the word was God. That's quite the classification or official position of word. It was in the beginning, it was with God, and it indeed was God. That's huge. That's powerful. So you could actually kind of substitute this and say that Jesus, the Christ, is to them that perish foolishness. You could substitute that in that way and still be accurate. And here's one of the things that I will point out from time to time, and I'll say this to people, and I'm giving you the rights to go ahead and use this if you so desire. I like to actually connect with people when I talk about the gospel using the word logic, because that's where the word logos or logos even came from. And I'll say something along the lines of, I'll give it to you. The gospel isn't really logical at all, because it's not. God came down from heaven and gave himself to die. Well, that's bananas. That's crazy. Like it really, truly is an insane idea. What kind of God loves his creation that much? And a lot of the gospel feels really silly to people. You know, a lot of the word feels silly. A lot of what we're told to do feels silly. It feels silly to love your enemy. That's silly stuff. It feels silly to be meek, especially in a dog eat dog world. It feels silly to give up everything and to dedicate all of yourself to an invisible being. It feels silly to sit in a room with a bunch of other people, and none of us is professional, really. I mean, some of us are a little more professionally trained than others, but then to be singing to a God that we can't even see, it feels silly sometimes. But no, it ain't silly at all. It's the most wonderful thing we can do. It feels silly to tell somebody, yeah, according to the Bible, you need to be immersed into water and come back out of the water in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Really? Like that's going to save somebody? You don't understand that the power isn't in the baptism itself. The power is in the fact that God said, do it. And if you don't do it, you show that you don't actually trust what He said, even if it feels silly. But God's the one who has the power to circumcise the heart. God's the one that has the power to make the change. God's the one that has the power to bring life. And He is the only one who has that authority. It is outside of my jurisdiction to do anything other than what God says. And even if I say something that's silly, if God said it, then I'm okay with it. But yes, indeed, the logic of the cross is to them that perish foolishness. And Jesus actually bowed his head, or actually, I think it says he lifted up his eyes to heaven and spoke to God and said, God, I thank you that you have hid these things from the wise and the prudent. You know what he's saying? I thank you that you have hid these things from the proud, but you have revealed them unto babes, those who are humble enough to just say yes to God. The promises in him are yea, yea, and amen. But anything outside of that is unstable and will not bring life. So swallow your pride and make sure to do things God's way, even if it seems silly. Swallow the pride every time and put in the work, put in the elbow grease, put in the walk with Him. Open up these words and let them move you and change you and transform you and grind you up and spit you out and lift you up and slap you in the face and all that stuff, because you're going to get all of that when you open up this Bible. You're going to get all of that. Sometimes it feels great. Sometimes I pick it up and I'm like, sweet mercy, and I'm on the floor almost in tears. Like this word is power. So swallow your pride. And if you have need to respond to the gospel call, you have opportunity to do so tonight while we stand and sing.